Google recently announced that the consent mode version 2 is becoming mandatory to build in with your consent management platform if you want to utilize the advertising features of the Google products out there. So today I thought I'd show you how you can build in the consent mode, and we'll do this with the help of the tool Cookiebot and Google Tag Manager. So let's get started. So here I'm on the website of Cookiebot already, and this is one of the many tools that you could choose if you wanted to have a consent management platform that has the built-in features of the Google consent mode being built in already. So this is a free tool to use. You also have a generous free plan if you choose so as well. So I have signed up here, and this is my dashboard where I have put in, first of all, my domain, and I configured already my little consent pop-up that I want to have on the website itself. And I added some cookies here and trackers that are running on my website. I did this manually because my website is under a login, and so it's not possible to get my website scanned, but normally you would scan the website itself, so it picks up the cookies and the trackers automatically. So then on my website itself, I have Google Tag Manager already installed, and currently I have some tags here that I want to put under the consent management platform and under consent mode. So we have the GA4 tag, we have the conversion linker, the Google Ads tag, and then meta pixel. So you see, we don't have any cookie consent set up right now or a consent banner as a whole. So let's change that and install Cookiebot. The cool thing about Cookiebot is that they have their own custom tag templates, so we can install them. Let's go over to the tags here and go to tag configuration, and then we'll enter the community template gallery. And here we are going to look for Cookiebot. And here we go, the Cookiebot CMP. Let's add this to our workspace and take a look at the different configurations. Here we need the Cookiebot ID, which we can get in the implementation part here. And this is the ID that we will need. So let me copy that, put that in here. And then there are some configurations as well as enabling the Google consent mode. And this will connect our consent banner with the right calls to Google Tag Manager, to the data layer, to the G tag that uses the consent management API. So we have all the right calls all automatically in there. All we need to do once we have the Google consent mode enabled, we need to also choose our default consent state. So what should our state be once the consent pop-up loads before any tags fire? You can decide this on region, but if you leave the region empty, it will be globally applied, and I will keep everything on denied and add this here. So this will be our default. Let's give this all a name and then add a trigger. And for the trigger, we'll utilize the consent initialization all pages trigger because we want to fire this first before any of our other tags fire. So let's choose that and save. I'll go to preview, put in the domain, and let's connect. And here we go, we get our consent pop-up where we can choose the different categories and click allow or deny and so on. So we'll click allow now, and let's take a look in the tag assistant at this stage. So in our tag assistant, we can see a lot of different calls now. So we have here calls about consent, and these are the consent calls that are being made to the G tag with the consent mode API. And here we can see the different categories: add storage, add user, add personalization, and so on. And by default, they're all denied. We are also seeing the new categories already being added from consent mode version 2. So we have add storage and add user data now, and these are also denied by default. And then once I made a decision, we see under here consent, we have an update here, and everything is granted because that's what I chose as the option in my consent. And on this call, there are no tags firing because all of the tags are initially still on container loaded. So here we have our G tag firing, Google Ads, conversion linker, and meta pixel, which shows us our tags are not yet connected to the consent management platform or to any of the consent choices that I have made. So we need to put them under this. And if you are using the consent mode, you already have these calls in there. You can actually connect Google Tag Manager to these calls as well with the consent overview. So what you can do inside of Google Tag Manager is go over to admin here, and then we can go to container settings and choose the consent overview. And now we can utilize specific triggers that are kind of new triggers and add them to the tags itself. So you get this little button right here where you see which tags already have the new configuration of the consent overview applied to them, and we don't have any of these applied yet. So all of our tags don't have that secondary trigger that will determine whether it can fire or not. Now what you see here as well is the built-in consent, and this is actually the altering of the functionality of the actual tags. So if you have any kind of built-in consent, then if the consent ad storage and analytics storage is denied, for the Google Analytics 4 tag, it will still be able to send these cookie list pings that would be part of the advanced consent mode. But more about this later. Let's go first into the basic mode of blocking our tags if there's no consent given. For that, we'll need to add an additional consent. So for example, for this GA4 tag, you can go into the tag itself and scroll down, and all of these have the setting now, the consent settings, where you can choose which additional consent needs to be required. And there are different categories, the categories that you saw already in the tag assistant here. So these are the categories, and we can add them to our require additional consent. This is kind of like a secondary part of triggers, and we can put in here analytics storage, for example, for Google Analytics 4. So you can do this for every tag, or go into this consent overview by clicking on this little shield icon here, and then you can choose which ones you want to put under the certain scope. So for example, the metapixel should be under advertising. So I'm going to add this here in this consent overview, require additional consent, and we'll put the ad storage in here. And then also let's put the conversion linker into these categories as well. And let's save this. And so now we have consent configured for these tags. You don't need to do it for Cookiebot because that needs to fire anyways in order to ask for consent from the user. Now, one thing that we need to take care of as well is the trigger itself, because this fires on the all pages trigger, and the all pages trigger is not sufficient because it would be on container loaded where we might not yet have a consent decision from the user. So we'll need to utilize a event that Cookiebot puts out with the consent mode, which is the cookie consent update. So this update call actually happens even if I already made a choice. So I'm going to go to the next website here. I will still get the cookie consent update, and that's an event that fires into the data layer every page view. Also, when I change my consent, so let's go ahead and change the consent around here. We should have a new cookie consent update right here. So this happens every time the consent changes, and that's what I want to use as a new custom trigger that will fire my events. So I'm going to copy this little part here. This is the event name, and let's go into the triggers and go ahead and create a new trigger for a custom event. And this is my cookie consent update. So this is a custom trigger, cookie consent update. And apply this everywhere where we have currently the all pages trigger installed. So I'm going to go through this menu right here and add our new cookie consent. And here we go. We have changed this around. And now let's test this out and preview this. All right, we get to the page, and let's go ahead and delete our cookies so we get our little dialog back. I'm going to go to the application, and then under my cookies right here, going to search for consent. And here is the Cookiebot consent. Let's get rid of that and reload the page. And let's say we only want to allow marketing for now. So allow selection, and let's see what happens in the tag assistant. We have our cookie consent update and our tags remarketing, conversion linker, and metapixel file, but not GA4 tag. So if you click on that, we see it didn't fire due to missing consent, although it was the right firing trigger. So we have two kinds of triggers now attached to the tag. One is the actual trigger that determines whether it fires or not, in which given circumstances, and then we have additional consent that didn't fire because we didn't have the analytics storage consent. You can also always look into this new tab called consent right here, where you can see the different consent statuses. So the current consent status is that ad storage, ad user, and ad personalizations are granted, but analytics storage functionality and personalization storage have been denied, and security storage is granted itself. So with that, we have put our tags now under the control of the user of giving that consent or withdrawing that consent with the second kind of triggers that you would put under the additional required consent. But how do you know now that this new consent mode is actually working? Well, consent mode itself is simply a way from the G tag to communicate to your tags how they function and what data they actually send over. You can control if this actually is happening by looking in the network requests. If you go back to our website here and open up the developer tools, which you can do here under the three dots, and then under more tools, you'll find your developer tools. and you can go over to the network requests and then look for your Google Analytics request. I need to reload the page here. And there are a lot of requests here. You can filter them by putting in your Google Tag Manager or Google Analytics ID. So G-, for example, will give you all the requests. Oh yeah, it didn't fire because we didn't fire Google Analytics 4. What we're going to do is change the consent now and allow everything. And let's see under the network tab now, let's reload. Should see an additional request, which is our collect request. And this is actually the request that goes over to Google Analytics. And here, in order to have the consent mode correctly installed, you should see a parameter. And this parameter is GCS. And then for the new consent mode, also GCD. And here you see some parameters that have been attached to this. This is how you know that the consent mode is actually sending data over and the consent status is sent over to the mother server of Google Analytics, Google Ads, and so on. So you need to look at the network request to see if this is actually working or not. If you don't see the GCD or GCS, then you don't have consent mode correctly installed and there's no signal, no flag sending over to Google Analytics or to Google Ads, for example. And what we have done here is the basic mode of the consent mode of the Google products right here. So if the user gives consent, the tags fire and this extra flag is added to the request itself. But if you wanted to utilize the advanced mode of the consent mode, so sending data over in a special way, even if there's no consent available or if consent has been denied, then you would need to change around your setup slightly. How would you do that? Well, the consent mode itself would not need to block the tags once the user denies the consent. So we will essentially get rid of our consent settings for these different tags. So on the conversion linker, GA tag and remarketing right here, we would remove our additional consent checks. Let me go into the right menu. So this is the menu right here, and we would remove the ones for GA4, for Google Ads and conversion linker. And we only do this for the Google tags because the other tags are obviously not governed by the consent mode at all. So Metapixel doesn't have that extra request going out, as this consent mode is really just a Google thing. So let's go ahead and unset the additional consent here. And here we go. We would now have our tags governed by the built-in consent that is already governing these tags. So if ad storage is denied, you would have cookieless pings that are being sent over. So this is the advanced mode implementation. I would kind of warn you of using this one. It needs to be in adherence with your privacy policy and your standards of how you want to implement your consent. Now, Google says that it will give you extra modeling capabilities in their tools. Nonetheless, you are skipping the consent of the user itself, which I don't think is a really good idea here, but that's up to everybody's own interpretation of how you should be implementing this. So right now we can see if the user says, okay, let's deny this whole tracking thing right here. So this is now denied. We'll open up the developer tools again and the network request. Let's reload our page. So now everything should be denied. We see this here under consent update. Everything here is denied. Nonetheless, on this event here, our GA4 tag fires, our Google Ads tag fires, conversion linker fires, we are still tracking data, but in a different way. And we can see here in the collect calls that this is a non-consented hit. You need to kind of decode what is in the request right here, but this would mean that everything is denied. Please only send these cookieless pings over to Google Analytics. And this would be the advanced mode implementation of the consent mode itself. Now, however you want to do it, at the end of this deployment, you obviously need to go ahead and test this thoroughly to see whether your different settings are adhering to the different consent that the user has given you. And then once you're ready, submit this as a version, put in a name, and then you're ready to go and have your Cookiebot installed with consent mode on your website. If you want to see more Google Tag Manager tutorials, we have tons of them over here. My name is Julian. Till next time.